And we are back. Joining us for our first segment is, Margaret Nichols, who is the Executive Director for the National Committee for Families and Children, and Lliani Arthurs, who is the Director of the Department of Human Services. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, good morning.
So we are continuing our conversation about protecting children, which I'm sure has been in the forefront of everybody's mind, since the tragic events of last week. So I think perhaps we can start off our conversation talking about, I guess, just a little bit of your reaction to these tragic events. And whenever, I suppose, something tragic like that happens, what's the first thing that you think of?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, well, good morning again. For us in child protection, the reality of child abuse is our daily reality. Our social workers work day and night in terms of responding to different challenges that children are going through in this country. But when you get a call of a nature like this, that a child has died at the hands of somebody who should be their protector, it does hit you and send shivers through you. And you right away realize that it affects you because the very nature of this life is to thrive. Our children should be in environments, excuse me, where they are able to thrive, they're able to realize their potential, so that they can be children. Mm-hmm. And to face the reality of the extreme severity of the corporal punishment that these children went through, the abuse that they went through, is that you go through the very same grief and loss process of denial first, that this can't be real. Then you go through anger, how could this happen? And I see that happening even in terms of our community's reaction to this. But I also think it brings us back to a sharp reality that our children are facing extreme difficulties. And as a community, we cannot turn a blind eye to the things that we're observing, because our children live in our communities. And so people are hearing, people are observing, and that we have to take stock of what is our response and what is our responsibility as a community to support, but also to hold accountable those parents who may be failing to provide adequate care and protection for their children.
Initial reactions?
Well, in CFC, we, as you know, are mandated to ensure the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And according to Article 6, a child has a right to be alive. And so, for us, it was extremely tragic. And I think what really and truly hit hard was the fact that how many more children are in this kind of situation. Because for me, because these things are happening behind closed doors. And for me, also for us, the difficulty is, why are people not reporting these incidences? Why is it that we feel that if a child gets one hit, it is okay, and that it may not continue? Because when you listen to the press releases and so on and so forth, the family knew and others knew that this was happening, no? And so for me, it was really and truly for us to figure out, what can we do to ensure that people are reporting when these things happen? Because I think that while we love our loved ones and so on and so forth, a child is young, vulnerable, innocent, and we have a duty of care. And just after celebrating the CRC at 30, and when we look at a number of the strategies that we have in place in terms of the child protection strategy to end violence against children, the fact that the National Women's Commission is working towards ending violence against our children, and then when we go back to the mixed statistics which shows that such a wide percentage of our children are being abused. And so the stark reality is that how much more are being abused? And so I believe that there has to be a different way of how we monitor these situations. I know one of the things that we have in our strategy is to look at how do we ban punishments in homes. And I know that is going to be a difficult area because even when we talk about child rights, people get sometimes upset. But notwithstanding that, children have rights. And so for me, I believe that we just have to continue to do what we are doing and more than we are doing to ensure that our children are in a better place. Yeah. So that was how it affected us.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask, based on something that you said just now, just to, I guess, kickstart the conversation, I want to know, how exactly do we define child abuse? And again, and I think you also mentioned in terms of percentages, and like how much are we, in terms of statistics, do we measure it, and how much, what are the numbers like in Belize?
Mrs. Otters would be able to.
Your first question was,
what is child abuse?
How do we define it? But,
okay. So the Family and Children's Act does give us the definition of child abuse. That is a very broad definition which talks about the infliction of harm to a child in relation to physical, sexual, emotional harm. It talks about neglect and the ill treatment of children. And so we then categorize it in that way in terms of the reports that we get. We also categorize commercial sexual exploitation of children as well, and trafficking of children. The data, it goes up and down through the years if we look at a trend for the past 10 years. But where we've seen consistency is in terms of the allegations of neglect being the most reported form of child abuse. And then we're now seeing that sexual abuse is the second highest reported form of abuse. Like maybe 10 years ago, it was physical abuse. But definitely the sexual abuse is now at second place. The total for 2018, I think I gave a slide, so maybe they will show it in terms of the presentation, in terms of the exact figure. But it was around 1,300 countrywide. Majority of the cases are being seen in Belize City. Of course, it's our biggest urban area, the highest population. And if I remember correctly, after that, it was Cayo having the highest percentage, and then I think North, in terms of where we're seeing the different forms of abuse. Yeah, so they did show this slide.
Cases, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so if you look at those numbers, you see neglect and abandonment at 575, followed by sexual abuse.
So 1,300 cases in 1 year. I sometimes I like the numbers game because it helps me put things into perspective. Yes. How many social workers do you have deployed across the country? We
have, in terms of child protection, we have 13 in Belize City, and we have 1 per district, and 1 in San Pedro.
So that's less than 20. And you had 1,300 reports.
Yes.
So that's 1,300 families.
Yes.
And you have less than 20 people to be able to respond. And it's a very detailed
in terms of the child protection process.
Because you don't go in once, you're supposed to go in multiple times and check and make sure.
Yes. So when they go in, and there is a slide that talks about the process, their first job is to find out if this is happening indeed. Yeah. So they have to consider the indicators of abuse. They have to do the preliminary interviews with the children, with the parents, with collaborative sources such as teachers, such as if it's neighbors, if it's other family members. So they have to do a thorough investigation to determine, is there abuse here? Now, where they find that there is abuse, they might have, we have 3 categorizations of findings. It could be unsubstantiated, meaning they go in and they don't see any indicators of abuse, the family seems to be functioning well, and so they will deem that unsubstantiated and close that case.
Okay.
They have cases where they go in and they see indicators of abuse, but maybe they can't fully prove it, but they highly suspect. And so those cases we would still monitor in terms of checking to see what is happening. And then you have the substantiated cases where they find indicators of abuse, and there they begin to engage the parents to say, look, there's something wrong here. And we have to then determine who is hurting the child. Is it somebody within the home? Was it somebody outside the home? So that we can determine safety and risk to see if we can work with that child in that home with that family. So we then have to look at what are the support systems around this child, what are the parents' capacities, what are their reactions to our coming into their lives. And a lot of times the initial reaction is hostility. Because I believe for parents, as we've worked this, that there's a sense of embarrassment that, oh my goodness, I got a call, somebody reported me. So initially there's that anger of, I don't want you in my home, we're fine, stay out of my business. And so the skills of the social worker in terms of engagement, helping them to understand our role, that somebody was concerned enough to make a call. So let's talk about what's happening, you know, and what support you need, what help, what is happening.
Yeah.
Because if your child is being hurt and you're saying you're not the one who has hurt your child, who has hurt your child? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear everything you're saying, but I'm still stuck on this mission impossible of 20 social workers addressing 1,300 reports in 1 year alone.
Yes. And that doesn't include that we don't close all cases from the previous year. So we have cases carrying over. So we call those open cases. So you have your new referrals per day, and then you have an open caseload. So their caseloads range from 40 cases to 80 cases for one social worker. Best practice approaches internationally talks about 25 is a more manageable to do intensive
to make
work.
sure nothing slips through the cracks.
Exactly.
Because when you have a lot of work to do, you can only dedicate so much of your time to each thing. Now this is it. I mean, I'm saying this and it's not an excuse because it just shows a clear gap that has to be addressed. We can't keep on talking about
and as we look at the reform of the system from the early years when all these legislations were put in place, the numbers were smaller, and we've seen steady growth of social workers. When I entered the system 24 years ago, we had what? 5? About 5 social workers for Belize City. And so you've seen that 5 grown to 13 because of the demand. And there's a constant recognition as we brainstorm improvements to the system that we have to continue looking at improvement of our human resources. We recently had an exercise with the Ministry of the Public Service where they came in to our ministry and looked at the whole demand and what are the human resources needs. And so they have verbally indicated that they've made some recommendations in terms of additional social workers for our district. The good thing with that, it gives us the platform for argument that as we ask for creation of new posts, that we're more likely to get an approval because they have recognized that there is a need for increased human resources.
We have an issue with abuse. Now, I want to step back just a bit because one of the things in your reflections at looking, because the entire feels this loss. When it's children, naturally, our hearts are a lot more open to feeling and empathizing. And so we are going through the grief and loss process. And a part of that process is blame. And the blame, ladies, being put on organizations like where is Human Services, where is NCFC, where is Special Envoy, where is, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So I want to give you the opportunity to respond to that because in this isolated case, people are saying, how is this child or these children living in these conditions? How was no one aware of the atrocities that were taking place in that home? And you can respond to the blame that's being cast on you.
For us as Human Services, blame is not unique to this case. And I think you're well aware that there's a lot of expectation of us in terms of the whole system. When you look at the child protection system, it does not only encompass Human Services. It's a system of agencies, and we've talked about this in the past in terms of the different roles that the law has specified in terms of health, education, the police, the judiciary, roles of like NCFC, UNICEF, you know, all of us have a role to play in terms of protection of children. The family is a key part of the child protection system. For us, we recognize that there's a sense of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. We get criticized for any response because, like I told you, the initial reaction by families are stay out of my business. You know, I don't appreciate that anybody called. And so that's the first blame and backlash that we often get at that micro level. In terms of families taking that upset to the media, a lot of times we're bounded by confidentiality, that even though they have breached their own confidentiality by making their situation public, in the interest of all parties, we have to do an analysis of how do we respond. Yeah. And so sometimes we've looked at maybe we don't respond enough to educate people in terms of our role, but we have to navigate a careful balance to not expose the details of a family situation because of the implications on a child. Because when you place a child's information within the public domain, you can't erase that. And that child has to go back into communities. And we had a training with the media some time ago. We talked about when whispers become reality. But no, this is not just whisper. This is national, international coverage of my life and of the difficult circumstance I'm going through. And so when that child now has to go back to school, and everybody watches news, even children, and those little children then say, oh, I see up on news and they say you get abused and you're and we don't think of the implications on that child. So we as an agency have to be responsible. That even though we would want to let people know exactly what that parent did to that child, and there they are saying that human service this, human service that, we would want to let the public know how they have failed to protect that child. We have to delicately balance that disclosure in the best interests of children. So a lot of times we take the blame. And we're like, okay, we're the bad guys. You know, because people would question, why have you removed that child? You know, we've gotten things like, you know, they're only a poor family, you know, and they're trying hard, and they don't know the details of some of the breakdown in the family structure that's caused risk to children, why we had to intervene.
Or they're just disciplining them, they're not, you know?
Yeah, you know, they're good parents. And society comes from that belief that parents do want to do what's best for their children. And we hear people say that in the conversation. You know, that nobody wants to seriously hurt their child. There must be a monster in order to hurt children. But I'm telling you, that anger as an emotion is a very dangerous emotion. And when people get angry, there's no difference between me, you, and a parent who has abused a child if anger gets out of control. Because if you lose control, you hurt. And I think it was Jenny who said it earlier this week, hurt people hurt others. And so there's a thin line between a non-offending parent and an abusing parent. And so we have to sometimes face the reality of what happens in families in these situations. No?
Well, first at NCFC, I think it is always difficult to explain this creature. Because the NCFC is not an implementing body, but we are coordination, advocacy, and policy and legal reform. The NCFC will never be seen on the ground. However, we have a responsibility to ensure that, for instance, we continue to advocate for the Ministry of Human Development to be able to get more social workers. Because we have to continue to advocate for government to see the reality of the situation, that our human resources is one of the most important resources in this country. And so that when we look at our budget allocation, more funds are sent over to the Ministry of Human Development. Because we're actually losing more and more for our young or vulnerable. And so that is the kind of responsibility that the NCFC has. also to ensure that the laws are reformed and that they're more user-friendly, that in fact we have to also look at how we can also advocate for more enforcement of legislation.
Yeah.
Because I think that we have all these laws, but they're not being enforced. I believe that, as I said earlier, we looked at how we could ban punishment in homes, which we know that it's going to be a difficult something to undertake, but we also believe that parents seriously need to be held accountable. Because I believe that while we understand that they have some difficult situations and so on and so forth, I believe that if once the department or those who work closely with the families have done certain things, then it behooves us to ensure then that they're held accountable for things that they're doing to our children or to their own children. Mm-hmm. Because whereas I agree that when we're angry we do certain things, some of the things that are done to children seem almost intentional. You know, it might not be, but that is how it seems. Because, for instance, there was a matter in Punta Gorda where the mother went out to do her shopping. By the time she got back, her child was molested. You know, and so I started to think, are we contemplating these things? You know, even when we enter into relationships, we enter into relationships for the good of whatever, but if we see signs that our partners are starting to look at our children and so on and so forth, we may have to find ways to get out of those relationships. So as parents, we must take on certain responsibilities. We must be very cognizant of what is going on with our children.
We have to pay attention.
We need to pay full attention. And the NCFC, this just drives to me that the NCFC has a lot more work to do in terms of the whole matter of advocacy and education. Mm-hmm. We have just recently held training for social workers and rovers and parent educators to help them to understand their roles and to be able to identify and work with these families. Yeah. We have also recently launched a parenting manual, but it says to me that the parenting manual has to go into rural areas, it has to go into communities. We have to find other ways. We're thinking about doing an app, we're thinking about all kinds of different ways to get the information out there, because while some people might say, oh, it's not never too late, because children are entering this world every day. And if we look at the ages of parents, we have some serious problems, because if we look at the whole issue of teenage pregnancy, if we look at the whole issue of early marriages and child unions and so on and so forth, we have some big problems to attend to. So as Mrs. Otter has said, it's supposed to be a holistic approach. It's not just human services, it's all of us. Yeah. I know in the area of domestic violence, the National Gender-Based Violence Committee on which I sit, we have just put together forms for people to be able to lay complaints where they see these things. But like the mandatory reporting regulation, like other regulations and laws, it's difficult to enforce them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think what we have to look at now is to develop some kind of mechanism, some kind of monitoring mechanism that, and I'm trying, as I'm speaking to you, I'm trying to figure what, to ensure that, people are responding to these things, because, they need to report.
You said quite a bit, both of you have. And one of the things you said was, we have big problems. And I want to push that further. We have a lot of big problems, and especially when it comes to what's affecting our children. Mm-hmm. I hate to just use this example, but I think this example can be used in many circumstances. We see the issue of domestic violence here. We see the issue of poverty here. Mm-hmm. We see the issue of broken family structures here. And these are all very big things to be able to tackle. Any one agency and collectively as a community, we must try. But education is very important. I agree. Awareness is important, but there's a sense that people will only seek enlightenment if they have the time to even contemplate it. I mean, if I have to worry about working 3 jobs, feeding the kids, I'm young, I still want my own life. I never learned any parenting skills other than the ones that my parents showed me. where and how will I get this information? How do we make steps towards being better and even make access into some of these families to start to get a movement of change?
Yeah. And that's why it's one by one adds to the whole. And we fully recognize that you have to look at a systemic approach to this issue.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons that you have a process like the Children's Agenda,
Yeah.
that all stakeholders were able to take stock of where we are as a country and what do we need to do to end violence
Yeah.
against our children. And we began that process with Nick, like what? It was, the Children's Agenda is now
3 years. It's going into 3 years.
Yeah.
and through that we were able to look at concrete actions by all stakeholders.
Yeah.
Because like I said, it's a systemic approach and each of us has a responsibility to
Yeah.
add to kind of begin to peel back the layers of how do we address all of these issues. And I think for us, a lot of it is a lot of mindsets. And if, like you said, if you've never learned, how do you take somebody else there if you don't know for yourself? And so the whole concept of what it means to be healthy, in terms of male, female, or couple relationship, it has to start there.
Yeah.
In terms of children don't just come, they come from some union. And is that union healthy? Has that union considered the implications of their union and what their union can produce?
Yeah.
And many times we see that they don't.
Yeah.
It's all about pleasure and temporary satisfaction without looking at
Consequences.
18 plus years.
Yeah.
Because even when they're 18, sometimes we don't let them go fully, no? Because we want to see them become the best adults that they can be. So we have to start there of how do we organize healthy? How do we organize healthy in terms of access? And you talked about that.
Yeah.
So if we're going to create a little family, we do have to consider spiritually where we are. We have to consider emotionally. Are we mature to begin this family? Financially, do we have access to economic opportunities to build this family? And that's where all those layers come in. In terms, as a country, how are we providing those access to people? And think about that in terms of programming.
Yeah.
Even the government has this strategy in terms of how do we roll out some of these access to our citizens as well, no?
I'm sure there must be, because what I hear from you, and I think anyone who really looks at the situation will see that there are different levels you have to work. You have to work with the younger kids to make sure they're getting the fundamentals, the teens to somehow get them access to proper sexual and reproductive health information. Young mothers, pregnant, young parents, pregnant mothers, and even people who maybe come into a first contact with the social services. But what about interventional work? What we don't hear of very often is, okay, yes, we know we have a critical problem. Some will even call it a crisis. 1,300 cases is a lot.
Yeah.
That's 1,300 children and maybe multiple children in a household that are in...
Those are the reported cases.
Yeah, and those are reported.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very valid point. Thank you for that. So they're in a situation where we don't know if they'll survive tomorrow. What are the interventions we can put in place?
Yeah.
And what is being advocated for? What do we need people to get serious about? Because the community is angry, but we need to funnel that somewhere to move towards actionable changes.
And how do we all play a role?
Yes.
And I think Ms. Nicholas talked about some of the interventions already in terms of when we talked about changing mindsets and we talk about education, it's just not academic. It's all about how do we form people's understanding of what is healthy. And one initiative is parenting.
Yes.
And as Ms. Nicholas said, in terms of formulating this revised parenting manual, that came with reorganizing organizations to have a discussion about what are we delivering, what is the content, and what are the messages that we are sending to parents, and how are we equipping them in terms of their role as parents to provide first care for their children. And so the first thing that NCFC approached was, okay, agencies, what are you currently delivering? They had to do a stock taking of what are you currently delivering, who are you delivering to, because we had to then look at coverage, you know, and how do we, as stakeholders, reorganize so that we don't have duplication and that we're not all going to the same places. Some of the discussions were that...
I didn't understand that.
Oh my
because we didn't ask you. Let's go ahead.
My apologies.
That's fine.
And so, yes, you know, totally true.
You are reorganizing and making sure that you're not duplicating efforts. Yes.
And so that as organization, we look at coverage, that this is a big problem. But let's talk about where will you deliver, where will I deliver, so that we are able to find the most vulnerable families. Oh, I just got my thought back. It was that a lot of times we recognize that who really needs to come to these sessions often are not the ones who come. And so when child protection intervenes, we have an opportunity with the court to recommend parenting classes, and the court is able to put this on the court order, and we call it mandatory.
Okay, I was going to ask if it's recommend or mandatory.
Parenting. And so that's one population, but we have the larger population that will come because they see buy-in, they see the benefits of it. And so our discussion is, how do we start earlier in terms of where is the captive audience of parents? And a lot of time it's through Ministry of Health. Before they become parents, and also when they're giving birth. So how do we start earlier rather than when they're intervening in child protection? And so those are some of the strategies that we're trying to formulate when it comes to that one aspect of intervention.
Recently, I know there's been a release of a parenting manual, maybe about this thick, but very, very, very thorough. And the NCSC launched that manual. It's a great tool, but where is it being implemented? My question is, have we approached high schools? I think parents, maybe I am venturing to guess, if your child takes one less CXC, one less. I mean, you know, most of the kids are going to U.S. universities anyway. One less CXC, and that class is dedicated to, let's say, a parenting class, and you teach them that manual. Have we looked to perhaps, because there's what we've always done, and I think maybe we're just at the point that we need to go new, innovative,
and think out of the box.
And perhaps challenge some of the ingrained systems that do exist, because as much as they like it, it hasn't been working.
Well, as a matter of fact, it is in some of the high schools, because we have approached the teaching community, and it is in some of the high schools. As I had said, I think in past shows, that the whole idea was to get it into the curriculum, so that it becomes a part of the university's curriculum. Because a parent, like I was saying earlier, that we are looking every day at innovative ways of trying to get it out there. I believe that we have to go to where people are, you know, and hence the reason why we brought in the parent educators, the rovers in Punta Gorda, and so on and so forth through the Ministry of Human Development, so that they will be able to get the information out there, because people will not necessarily come to where we are. So some of our interventions must be different. We have to go. In terms of the whole issue of early marriages and early unions, we're about to, on the 19th or so, we're about to launch the roadmap to also, again, to accelerate actions to end child marriage and early unions. And that is another intervention, another opportunity to not only to work with young people, but also to work with the churches and other persons who are marrying these children. Because notwithstanding the fact, and this is again where we go to legislation, notwithstanding the fact that we have a law that says that the child cannot be married with the permission of his parents when they're 16, we know of recent cases where children are 15 and they're being married. And they're being married by marriage officers. So it says to us that...
Justice of the pieces? That's what you mean? Church pastors?
I'm talking about pastors, right? So we realize that this is going to be another opportunity to work, because we have already sat down with them. We have had several validation sessions with them to help them to understand the whole issue of early marriages and early unions and the impact that it has on these young persons and the children that are coming into these relationships, you know. So really and truly there are several initiatives. There is the parenting guide, there is the child protection strategy. As a matter of fact, Monday we are meeting as the whole body to look at our work plan and to see what are not to see what are the interventions, but how the whole methodology of how we are going to move the interventions within the strategy. So that is one of the things that we'll be doing on Monday. So there's quite a lot going on, but I still believe, and I feel so strongly about it, that we need to look outside of the box. We need to get into communities. We probably need to bring more people to the table. Because one of the things that we plan to do again for this year, again, is to do stock taking. Because we have been bringing the agencies to the table to tell us what is it that you're doing for children. We have gone as far as to go to the different ministries to find out, so in your budget line, what is there for children? Because there is a children's agenda. So, Labor Department, what are we doing in terms of labor laws, and what are we doing with our children? In terms of education, in terms of health, the whole issue of, as you said, sexual reproductive health. We have everybody, and we will be doing that shortly again, stock taking, and to ask people to try and, you know, to be more innovative in whatever they're doing, and to see, which is sometimes a problem, NCFC as not only the secretariat, but that everybody who sits around that table is a member of the NCFC, and that is why they're on the committee, and they have a responsibility to our families and children in this country.
And I just want to add in terms of the critical role of the community to help us. You know, we have different programs as children come into protective care. And the reality is that all the children that come into care cannot go back home. We have different permanency plans for children, and the first attempt is family preservation. How do we preserve the family? How do we support them in their caretaking role? But that does not always end up being what's best for children. And sometimes we do have to go to the court to show that it is not in this child's best interest to go back home, because it will cause further harm to this child. And so then we have these children in care who feel disconnected. Sometimes our children say, we feel that we're the ones that have been put in jail, you know, because we end up in foster care or we end up in a residential care facility, you know, but our parents are still there, probably making more children, or they're partying, going to nightclubs, having a fine time. And then here we are, rejected, feeling abandoned. What's going to happen to us? And these are real questions that our children have. And so we have the task of helping them form connections and look at reconnecting with healthy, you know, adults and other peers. And some of them, we've gotten them to the point to come back to a place to dream again. Because when children have been abused and they've gone through trauma, a sense of hopelessness and helplessness sets in, that they can't see beyond today. And sometimes they begin to act out behaviorally because they're angry, because they're disappointed. They feel that adults have broken their trust, have failed them. And so they want, as we talk about hurt people, hurt others, they want to hurt back to let you know how I'm feeling, you know? And so when we're able to get these children to a place to dream again, to look at a future, to look at a potential connection with their community, they begin to advocate for themselves. And I think one of the serious strides we have made is to get these children to be aware of their rights, and they're aware to find their voice again. And as they begin to get older, they want the opportunities to connect with their community, and one of that is in jobs. We've had some employment opportunities in Belize City that they have really, you know, come to the table to say we will hire these young people for the summer, for Christmas, and I see so much potential there for a partnership with the business sector in terms of giving and realizing that dream for these children, that they can do it.
Yeah.
You know, and one of these girls, she often comes to us at Human Services, like on her break or her lunch break, you know, and she'll come and she'll say, "Hi, Mrs. Waters." She said, "I can't talk. I have to get back to work." You know, and it just brings a smile to your face. And those are the situations that, like, yes, you know,
You're making impact.
we are making an impact, and we can if we work together. And that's what I talk about in terms of how each of us look at how can we help.
Yeah.
The whole issue of mentorship, when we talk about reestablishing healthy, there's so many skilled people in our country.
Yeah.
Some of them have walked these same walk that can give back. These young people need that type of mentorship and coaching to help them to look at, how do I implement this dream? How do I make this dream a reality? And you can help in that way as a form of intervention. These children are in your schools, these children might be in your workplaces, you know, these children might be in your aftercare program. And connection, and not taking for granted the power of connection, because that's what all of us as humans want, is to feel that we're connected and that we have a role, that we understand that we're not just here for nothing. We're here for a purpose to recognize what our giftings are and how do we give that back. And our children want the same thing.
Yeah.
I think another wonderful opportunity and another wonderful initiative is the Sustainable Municipality Child-Friendly Initiative, which is an initiative through UNICEF for which the NCFC has partnered with. And that gives an opportunity to work directly with young people and for young people to be able to work within their municipalities. One of the good thing about that program is that communities, municipalities will now be certified. In fact, the first certification has taken place, where medals were being awarded, and they were silver and bronze, because nobody is at gold and platinum. But I think that it is to ensure that your municipality is child-friendly.
Yeah.
And so the strategic plans of that initiative has actually aligned with the children's agenda.
Yeah.
So the same goals and the same outcomes are the same goals and outcomes of the municipalities. And I think that there is an assessment team, and I believe that through this initiative, we should see places much better for children. I believe that the communities will be striving, the ministers, not the ministers, the mayors, because there is a mayor association.
Yes.
And I think that they will be striving for gold. And I think if they really strive for gold, I don't know, platinum eventually, but if we strive for gold, and it is in the best interest of our children, then I want us to continue to nurture that same initiative.
Yeah.
And so we can, as a matter of fact, we were supposed to meet again tomorrow. Yeah. But of course that has been postponed to later on. But we at NCFC want to continue to work very closely with the CABs, because these are all young persons. And there are young people who are saying to the mayors in their municipalities, this is what we need.
Yeah.
And it is about safety, it is about domestic violence, it's about parenting, it's about, as I said, the same issues that are under the children's agenda.
Yeah.
So that is going to help us with the municipalities as well. So there's quite a bit going on, notwithstanding the fact that we understand that a lot more needs to be done, and we cannot, I think the one thing that we cannot do is to say no. Throw up our hands and say
well,
no.
And that's one of the points I wanted us to address before we completely run out of time. It's that the community blames entities because I think sometimes we don't feel, I mean, I can't go into a house or I don't know which house needs help.
But sometimes you do.
Sometimes you do.
Well, I know. Yeah. But I'm saying it's that connection that hasn't been linked. So what can people do? What do you, as people who are working, whether in changing policies or enforcing policies or directly going into homes and trying to get them back together, or, you know, do what's best for the kids, what do you wish the external community would do to assist?
Well, we've talked about some of it already, but it's a partnership.
Yeah.
And the community plays a critical role in terms of supporting children, supporting families, and supporting their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the success comes when community engages and says, I'm not going to turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
And so they are hearing.
With reporting, for example.
You're hearing that child screaming. You're hearing every day this parent cursing the child. You're hearing swats. You might not know what's happening, but you're hearing that something is off. You might see. You might be either a teacher, you might be a neighbor, you might be a medical practitioner. You're seeing injuries that makes you question whether this child shouldn't have bruises, you know, and the child might tell you, oh, I bucked my head into the door, but you're watching where the bruise is and you're like, something off here. It's not your responsibility to prove that this child is being abused. The law specifies that you just have to suspect, you know, so err on the side of caution and say, I will make the call. I say, look, I don't know if something's happening. It just crawls my blood every time I hear it. Just check for me. Just going to check, make sure that that child is okay. That's the first responsibility of the community, to report.
Yeah.
If you suspect, like I said, you don't have to prove it. You know, and then as we penetrate, we talked about the mentorship in terms of, you have children in your community, you know, talk with them, interact with them. You know, you can give, you can sponsor children in terms of their educational costs. As we talk about the issues of poverty, some families are struggling and they need that little extra help. And we talk about, you know, how do you provide opportunities in terms of jobs for those families so that they can provide for their children. And we talk about the business sector even providing jobs for children to give them those opportunities for them to break the cycle of poverty.
And signing up for foster care and respite care. And
yes, thank you. We recognize that children, in terms of connection, are best served within a family setting. It's a smaller setting where you can recognize their needs, recognize the pain that the trauma has caused, and help that child towards healing. And opening your home to that child can be the difference that that child needs in terms of helping them form those connections and to heal. So definitely become a foster parent and to partner with us. For the children that have permanency plans of adoption, you can become an adoptive parent to say, okay, I don't know if my heart can handle only having them temporarily. When everything is settled and this child needs a permanent home, I'm willing to be that permanent home for the child, and to help people understand the difference between foster care and adoption. Foster care is providing temporary care. You're saying, I'm willing to help the child, but I'm also willing to help the family. I realize that they're going through a difficult circumstances. The family needs reorientation of their role as a parent, to learn parenting techniques, to go through counseling, to deal with anger management. And while they're doing those interventions, I'm willing to help the child, provide a safe space for the child, and I'm willing to help that child and parent reconnect. And I'm even willing to help that parent understand what safety is and how to provide a safe place for a child. So those are foster parents.
It's temporary.
It's temporary. We also have respite foster parents, and these are people who come in and say, you know, I don't know if I can take them permanently in my home because of my own limitations, but for the Christmas, for Easter, for the summer,
for weekends,
I'm willing to give them a little break from the residential facility that they're at, and let them experience community life, let them experience Belize, and let them realize that they can hope, they can dream. There's more than where they live, and you're exposing them to what's healthy too. And then, of course, like I said, adoption.
All right.
For the NCFC, we still want to see more mandatory reporting. There is a mandatory reporting regulations. And the thing is, as parents, we have a moral obligation. And as duty bearers, we have a legal obligation.
Actually, parents have a mandatory obligation.
Mandatory.
Only the wider community has a moral obligation.
Moral obligation. But the thing is that we are not reporting, and that is the problem, you know, because we're seeing it. As duty bearers, we're seeing it. And the thing is, we also have to, notwithstanding our limited situations, we have to respond to every single call when there is a call, because wherever there is a call, there is danger. And so we have to respond, we have to do what is it that we have to do. I think sometimes as neighbors, as friends, and so on and so forth, we don't want to rock the boat. Sometimes we have to rock the boat, you know, so we do have that legal responsibility, that moral responsibility, but we have mandatory responsibility as well. And as far as I know, it has never been enforced. Again, another piece of regulation.
Because if you knew of the abuse and you didn't report it,
you
the
know,
law
so
says you can be fined and
exactly,
and
confined. So I believe, again, we have a responsibility to ensure that the public, because I know NOBCAN does a lot of education around mandatory reporting
with teachers,
but with teachers, but then I believe that this has to now come into communities and homes, so that people know that this exists. You know, because sometimes people don't know. And if they don't know, they don't know, no? And so I believe that for us, the advocacy and so will continue. And we will not give up.
But I just want to, like how I have this opportunity to thank those community members that have stepped up to the plate, that have reported, that have come to say, I will help you in terms of fostering, in terms of adopting, mentorship. Those that have stepped up to the plate, I just wanted to say thank you, and we want more people to do that. Since this case was reported on Friday, Monday, we had clinic at our office in Belize City with the community pouring in to report cases of child abuse. So we could see that it did wake everybody up in terms of their responsibility to report. And we want that people sustain that.
That's the most inspiring thing I've heard out of this entire incident. Because while people may be fearful of losing the friendship or the neighborly relationship, they could be saving the child's life. Thank you so much for coming in.
Can you indulge me 1 second? My daughter read a little speech from me last night, and I asked her permission if I could just share it, and so she gave me permission.
Ahead. This will close us off for the segment.
It says, I have a dream. Violence is an angry lion ready to attack on its prey. Another person shot, another person raped, another person robbed. When will it stop? I have a dream that when I put on the news, I will feel encouraged, not hopeless. That when I walk in a park, I have no fear that it will be the last. Let's come together and end violence before violence ends us.
Very nice.
And she's 13.
Wow.
Thank
Powerful. You. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It was and thank you again for coming on the show. That was a wonderful way to close that segment. We are now going to be taking our break, and when we come back, we are going to be joined by Pixie Fairy Cupcakes, and they're going to be telling us about how to decorate and enjoy cupcakes.
That's right. We'll take a break. We'll be back in a few.